I think we've all noticed how the show has slowed down after an eventful season premiere, and of course the season finale had to compensate. So it does, as Season 3 signs off with a bang and some major character deaths to mark a significant turn in the Targaryen Civil War. I also realize that the show is sticking close to the notion that there can be no real winner in this war, because just like it happened in the Battle of the Gullet, where Rhaenyra won a victory while losing something precious, the Battle of Tumbleton ends the season with a similar climax. Moreover, we get to witness Rhaenyra's descent into tyranny and madness, which definitely doesn't bode well for her future. With so much that went down in this episode, I'll break down the entire season finale for you, while also elaborating on the ending. There will be some major spoilers along the way, so you have been warned. Aegon II Targaryen is alive, and news has spread. I was wondering how the show would deliver some sort of closure before they come back for Season 4, because so many storylines were hanging loosely. Well, it seems like the final episode, titled The Treasons at Tumbleton, get the first thing right by putting together a 70-minute episode that gives you enough time to embrace all the events. It happens to be one of the longest episodes of this season, and deservingly so, because both the production values as well as the story are worth savoring. It was one of the defining moments in the previous episode when Aegon marked a major turnaround in his journey. Instead of running and hiding, he chose to face the enemy and fight, and this bravado was backed up by the miraculous resurgence of his dragon's sunfire. The army marching for the Blacks must have sent news fast enough, because the final episode begins with Grand Maester Orwyll heading toward Rhaenyra's room with an urgent message in the middle of the night. The message was delivered via Raven, and Rhaenyra, who was already shaky about her stature as a ruler, now learns that Aegon is alive and the war is far from over. Rhaenyra completely loses her calm. To be fair, she wasn't very calm and level-headed to begin with, and her rise to the Iron Throne hasn't done her any good so far. When she finds out that Aegon and Sunfire are still out there, she goes into a frenzy and heads straight for Daemon's room. He's preparing for the battle at Tumbleton, and he receives the news in true Daemon fashion. Of course, he has experience on his side, and he's composed as Rhaenyra talks about how the subjects have probably waited for such news, and now they're waiting outside the Great Sept to celebrate. Daemon's still convinced that the prophecy holds them in great importance for future crisis, and their fate is to hold the throne. He probably doesn't realize that Aegon has the same blood, but his calm doesn't translate to the Queen, and it becomes worse once he leaves for Tumbleton. Also, I find her advice to Daemon quite ironic. I mean, so far she was the one who was ignoring all the more violent suggestions from him, but now she agrees that Tumbleton has to be attacked. She asks for restraint and self-control so that Daemon doesn't kill any common folk, but this is more to avoid the chances of fury of the commoners than any real compassion for them. When she says, "Do not make a monster out of me," I think it's already too late for that, because that ship sailed through some of her earlier actions. Also, nothing seems to be going her way, and instead of earning new friends, she's finding ways to antagonize those already on her side. In this episode, you can see a showdown with Baela, who's finally had it with the Queen and her selfish ways. She's baffled that Rhaenyra's not working on rescuing the captured sea snake, and she's so frustrated that she gives the Queen a piece of her mind. She subtly brings up Rhaena, who's literally a prisoner at this point, and instead of resolving the conflict, what does Rhaenyra do? She calls both Baela and Rhaena insolent and goes on to say that insolence runs in their blood. It's later revealed that Baela has been confined to her chambers as well, and it's almost like the Queen has no regard for her able dragon riders at this point. However, I have to say here that the actor playing the role of Rhaenyra, Emma Darcy, delivers one of the best performances in this episode, and overall, her work might be slated for some big awards. Anyway, coming back to the story. Adam and Hugh are tasked with guarding King's Landing with their dragons, because now there's a twin threat for the Blacks. Aside from Aemond, it can be Aegon to launch a surprise attack, and a paranoid Rhaenyra is preparing for the worst. But her Mad King vibe doesn't just end here. She lashes out on Mysaria, and it seems like luck has run out for the Mistress of Whispers. Now it feels like ancient history when she seduced the Queen and she's evicted from the Red Keep. A passage has been booked for her on a ship to Pentos, and Rhaenyra wants her gone without so much as a final meeting. Mysaria is shocked by this new development, and I have to say this is another example of poor decision making from the Queen. For Helaena, it's a grand goodbye. Well, I know this happens much later into the episode, but there are a few early signs that you can pick up on. For instance, as she's led back to her chambers after some time in the Godswood, she has a quick vision of the Grey Mare and wagon from her dream in the courtyard of the Red Keep. The grim vision is enough to tell you what happens eventually, but as of now, Mysaria does something that Rhaenyra should have expected while expelling her. She tells Helaena that Aegon is still alive, and that her child will always be a hostage to keep Aegon at bay. Later, Rhaenyra tries to convince her to eat, but she too has had enough of the Queen's hypocrisy. She speaks her mind without fear and reminds Rhaenyra of her selfishness and how she is only concerned about how things could work out to her advantage. Now, Rhaenyra does something that the Mad King would do in this situation, when she orders the guards to force-feed Helaena. It's clear that she desperately wants to have leverage over Aegon, and for this, Helaena and her child must be okay. I love that Helaena denies her this little victory because at the end of the episode when Rhaenyra goes to her room, she finds out that Helaena has jumped to her death. What I find interesting is the reaction of the Queen when she realizes the seriousness of what has happened. She's hardly bothered. She's more concerned about the tapestry that Helaena was weaving because it shows Rhaenyra on the Iron Throne with flames and violence around her. You can tell that Rhaenyra is too far gone at this point. And it's good that things are finally in line with books because Rhaenyra was far less villainous so far. The true origin of Alys Rivers. The mystery woman with a knack for saving Aemond finally gets some much-deserved backstory in this episode. Firstly, Aemond is obviously recovered from the earlier poisoning attempt by his mother Alicent, and now he's more keen for redemption than the throne. He's guilty about betraying his brother, and in his vulnerable moment, Alys Rivers reveals her story. We find out that she was the wife of Harren the Black, the infamous man who built Harrenhal, and Aegon the Conqueror burned her son with his dragon fire and destroyed the castle. She was desperate to save him and used some old magic and spells, but instead of saving him, this turned her immortal and left her here. I was a bit surprised by this because this one's not from the book, but it does change things about the Witch of Harrenhal. Earlier, it was assumed that Harren the Black's entire bloodline was lost in the fierce assault, but now we see a twist. It also makes her well over 100 years old, which only confirms what I always assumed about her supernatural qualities. But instead of being shocked by the revelation, Aemond actually loves her for the truth. The man does have his share of twisted kinks, so who am I to question his love for an undead witch? At least he's remorseful and shows true emotions, which is not something I expected from him. Did we just see peace between Aegon and Aemond? Given how the story's panned out so far, peace between the Targaryen brothers is not something I had foreseen, so this does come as a surprise. Aegon is now a new man after the return of Sunfire, and Aemond finds himself in Harrenhal. The former king is here to confront Aemond, and he had a good mind to execute him for his earlier betrayal. But even Aegon is just as shocked as me when he sees that his brother has turned a new leaf. Aemond shows no defiance and simply begs forgiveness and resigns to his fate. I guess this makes Aegon forget about revenge for the time being, especially because he's smart enough to know that Aemond and his dragon can be a handy ally in the upcoming war. Nevertheless, it is nice to see the brothers reunite as Aegon declares that they will leave Harrenhal together in order to find Vhagar, which is the first order of business. Also, it's nice to see Alys getting the recognition that she always craved for when Aemond introduces her to his brother as his betrothed. I love how this sets up season 4 because surely the brothers uniting with their dragons will amount to a significant blow for the Blacks. As of now, they're not in Tumbleton, at least not in time to prevent what happens next. The Battle of Tumbleton. Honestly, we were all waiting for this moment, and the season finale does not disappoint even though the build-up to the actual battle plays the waiting game. It all starts in Tumbleton, with Ormond deciding to knight Daeron Targaryen as Sir Daeron the Daring. Talk about a desperate syncing with the book here. However, it would have been nice if he was knighted after some gallant feat like in the book when he fought at the Battle of the Honeywine and got knighted. But their celebration is interrupted because they can see the massive black army assembled outside their gates. Unfortunately for Ormond, his earlier plan to use Ulf the White and his dragon isn't working out so well because the lousy fellow's getting drunk at the tavern. He never was reliable and he surely isn't now. Of course, Ormond does something that's an absolute war crime when he makes children human shields to deter attackers. It turns out that Gwaine is a lot more honorable and he and Daeron finally do something to defy the orders of Ormond. They free Corlys and return him to the Blacks with the hope that the goodwill gesture will prevent more violence. Meanwhile, the Winter Wolves are here, and when Daemon arrives with Caraxes, everyone is hyped up for a fight. Lord Oscar Tully, Black Aly, and Roddy the Ruin are all here after their delayed arrival, and the initial battle plan is simple enough. Burn the Green Army with Caraxes before storming the city. But the children used as human shields make this plan unsuitable, and Roddy and the Winter Wolves plan to scale the walls and open the gates, following which Daemon and Caraxes will provide cover as the Tully forces break through the gates. I love how the Winter Wolves are mostly comprised of older men, and yet they're so fierce and deadly because they don't see this war as something they'll ever come back from. Gwaine arrives with Corlys, but Daemon is in no mood to negotiate when he clearly sees himself winning. Gwaine even has an interesting offer where he offers to split the Seven Kingdoms in two, so that Rhaenyra and Daemon can both rule. At this point, Daemon just wants it all, and it's Corlys who has a better proposal. He offers that Daemon can be called Lord Paramount of the Reach in order to keep the realm intact, and a dignified surrender for the Greens. In the book, Alicent suggested this to Rhaenyra, but I think the show version is way more intense and dramatic. Unfortunately, Daemon's not much of a diplomat, and he rejects this as well. He's so hell-bent on a fight that he gets the Sea Snake taken prisoner because Corlys asks him to reconsider. The battle begins, and Daemon is annoyed to see Ulf the White is absent because he has no idea how Ulf has changed sides. But he still gets a surprise visitor in the form of Hugh the Hammer, who has arrived with his dragon. Meanwhile, the Winter Wolves break through the walls, and their fighting style is a reminder of the good old days when we watched Stark soldiers fight in the Game of Thrones. They suffer casualties as oil and stones are thrown on them, but they're so ferocious that they gain an advantage. The fight is really cinematic, and I think we can all agree that the production level is sky high this season. The Winter Wolves fail to get the gate open as Jon Roxton's soldiers intervene, and Daemon desperately struggles to free his dragon Tessarion, showing once again that he's anything but a coward. Eventually, it takes Caraxes to open the gate, and unfortunately, a couple of kids are burned in the process. While all this is happening, Aemond has discovered a drunk Ulf, and he is furious. He beats and hauls Ulf outside, but Ulf's had enough, and he goes berserk as a rogue element in the war. Yeah, he burns the Black Army, but he also destroys the Hightower forces, and he's an absolute menace. I still can't get over the fight scene between Roderick Dustin and Aemond, where the Northman smashes his head and Aemond chops his arm off. In a typical Northman style, he continues to fight, and just as he stabs Aemond to death, Silverwing flies above them and torches a platform where they're fighting. The other duel between Daemon and Jon Roxton doesn't go swell for the Rogue Prince, as he nearly dies fighting someone bigger and stronger. He gets a lucky reprieve from one of Silverwing's random attacks that break the fight, but the damage is done. Ulf and his crazy act have burned Tumbleton to the ground, and people are left clueless. The last stage of the battle is about the consequences of all that's happened. Caraxes chases Ulf and Silverwing away, but it's too late. Hugh finds his wife Cat, but it's not so happy a reunion because she's dead. It's all the more tragic when you realize that Hugh was only here because of her. I wouldn't be surprised if he's punished for abandoning his post in King's Landing, and this might turn him against the Blacks. Also, I was disappointed to see that Daemon and his dragon have no role to play in this battle, because this is not how things happen in the book. I'm sure he'll be alive for the next episode, and we'll get to see more of his dragon. Once again, this is a battle that nobody really wins. Yes, the Blacks win the immediate victory, but it has come with some major costs and the death of small folk, which will not sit well with the Queen, who wants to be the crowd favorite. Oh, and I almost forgot about the quick appearance of Alicent, as she watches blue butterflies in the bushes from her camp in the Riverlands. Her role is far from over, and I'm keen to see how they handle her story in the next season. Crown versus Faith. While the Battle of Tumbleton is shifting the power balance, the Queen is up to her own strategy. Rhaenyra was not happy with the High Septon after he refused to coronate her, and now that everyone knows about Aegon's survival, things don't favor her at all. Moreover, she's heard that the people have gathered outside the Great Sept to listen to the High Septon, and she decides to go there and force him to anoint her. She's dressed like Cersei Lannister toward the end of Game of Thrones, and she tries her best to be intimidating, but it doesn't really work. With Alan by her side and her soldiers, she thinks it'll be easy, but the High Septon refuses outright. It gets him killed, and I don't see how this helps Rhaenyra in keeping a grip on the kingdom, because, if anything, it only antagonizes the people further. She does attempt to save her image as she addresses the crowd and tells them about the Song of Ice and Fire prophecy and how she has to protect the realm. What's worth noticing here is that Mysaria is also hidden away in the crowd, which means that she's been able to give the guards a slip. She's disappointed to say the least, watching helplessly as Rhaenyra continues to fuel her illusion about her legacy and rule. This just about seals the deal with Rhaenyra as the new villain in the show, because I don't see a comeback from all that she's done. Helena's death just seals that deal for me, because even though she looks like she killed herself, it's actually Rhaenyra who pushed her to this point, even after promising Alicent otherwise. A finale to remember. I really appreciate the fact that the episode doesn't feel dragged and wraps up on some crucial storylines. But overall, it still feels like an episode of betrayal because it's all about the false promises from Ulf to Daemon. Neither did Ulf help the Hightower forces, nor did Daemon safeguard Tumbleton and prevent it from burning down. The war scene is a soothing recovery for those suffering from the trauma of watching the battle against the White Walkers in Game of Thrones. The cliffhangers are essential for the next season, and all I can say is that you will see power shifting when the Targaryen Civil War resumes. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this episode, and also share your thoughts about the glorious battle and the climactic twists. Like the video, subscribe to our channel, and be sure to ring that notification bell so you don't miss another marvelous video. Stay safe, have a great day, and as always, stay marvelous.